Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's story. Meet Ethan Brooks, a successful and well-known CEO of a tech company. His reputation precedes him, confident, sharp, and always in control. But there's something you don't know about Ethan. Despite his outward success, he's lonely. He's surrounded by a team of people, but none of them truly know him. All of his relationships feel transactional, and nothing ever gets past the surface. His business is thriving, but his personal life? Not so much. It was a regular Wednesday when Ethan's phone buzzed. It was an urgent message from his assistant. "Ethan, we need to talk about the event tomorrow night. Everything is set, but you need to approve the guest list." Ethan rubbed his eyes, staring at the screen, his thoughts already drifting to the gala. It was a charity event, the kind he was expected to attend, give his speech, and smile for the cameras. He hated these events. He had attended too many over the years, but they always felt the same, full of empty conversations and empty faces. He put his phone down and leaned back in his chair, thinking about the future he was building. His company was growing faster than ever, and he had the world at his feet. But what was the point of all this if there was no one to share it with? His phone buzzed again, but this time, it wasn't his assistant. It was a text from his mother. "Ethan, are you coming to the family dinner this weekend? You haven't been around much lately." He sighed and put the phone down again. His mother, bless her heart, never understood the pressures he was under. She still thought he could drop everything for family dinners. The door to his office opened, and his assistant, Claire, stepped inside. "Ethan, you have a meeting in 5 minutes. Should I bring in the presentation materials?" she asked, her voice crisp, yet polite. Ethan nodded, his mind still lingering on the thoughts of his family and his own isolation. Claire had been working for him for a few months now, and though she was efficient, he never really paid attention to her. She was just another part of the machine that kept his life running smoothly. But today was different. As Claire entered the room, she caught Ethan's gaze for the first time in a way that made him pause. She wasn't wearing the usual business attire, no tailored jacket or dress shoes. She was in a simple black dress that hung effortlessly on her frame, paired with a pair of flats. Her hair was loosely tied back, and there was something in her eyes, something he hadn't noticed before. It was vulnerability, the kind of vulnerability that Ethan had buried deep inside himself for years. She placed the materials on his desk and gave a small smile. "I've been thinking about the gala tomorrow night," Claire began. "I know how much you hate these things, but maybe this one could be different. Maybe it's time to stop pretending." She spoke softly, but her words hit him in a way he wasn't expecting. The silence between them stretched for a moment, and Ethan was taken aback by her honesty. He didn't know Claire that well, but there was something about her sincerity that made him feel seen in a way no one else had. He quickly glanced down at the materials she had brought in, trying to avoid the sudden rush of emotions that bubbled up in him. Before he could say anything, Claire spoke again. "I just think it's time to be real. Maybe you're not as alone as you think." She turned to leave, but before she could walk out the door, Ethan called after her. As Ethan sat back in his chair, he felt something shift within him. He didn't know exactly what it was yet, but for the first time in a long time, he felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, there was more to life than work and charity events. Maybe Claire was right. It was time to be real. The next day, Ethan arrived at the charity gala, dressed in a perfectly tailored suit that spoke of his status and success. The room was filled with people he barely knew, all mingling with fake smiles and hollow conversations. Yet, as he walked through the crowd, his mind wasn't on the event. His thoughts kept drifting back to Claire's words, the sincerity in her voice. For the first time in years, he felt like someone had truly seen him. Not just the CEO, not just the successful businessman, but the man who had buried his emotions beneath layers of ambition and responsibility. The event was a blur of handshakes and polite nods. He was expected to give a speech later in the evening, but he found himself not caring about any of it. He couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted within him. As the evening wore on, he glanced around the room, noticing how everyone seemed so immersed in their roles, just like he had been for years. Smiling, shaking hands, talking business. Everything was part of the act. But Claire, she had been different. She had shown him a glimpse of something real. For the first time in ages, he was starting to question what was real and what was just a performance. After what felt like an eternity, Ethan finally stepped away from the crowd and made his way to the balcony. The city lights below twinkled like stars, and the cool night air felt refreshing against his skin. He leaned against the railing, trying to clear his mind. It was quiet up here, away from the noise of the gala, away from the expectations and pressure. He closed his eyes, feeling the stillness settle in. Was this really all he had to show for his life? A high-rise apartment, a successful company, and a reputation that was built on perfection? But no one truly knew him. Not like Claire had begun to. Her words, "Maybe it's time to stop pretending," echoed in his mind. Just as Ethan was beginning to sink deeper into his thoughts, he felt a presence beside him. He turned to find Claire standing there, her posture relaxed but confident. She wasn't in her usual professional attire. Tonight, she wore a simple but elegant dress that complemented her effortlessly. She looked out at the city skyline, her expression soft and thoughtful. For a moment, neither of them spoke. It felt like the world had quieted down just for them. "You look like you needed some air," Claire finally said, her voice gentle but steady. "I figured I'd find you out here." Ethan nodded, unsure of how to respond. There was something different about the way Claire looked at him tonight. It wasn't with the typical respect he got from others or the admiration that came from his status. It was something deeper, more genuine. He felt exposed under her gaze. "I'm not sure why I came out here," Ethan admitted, his voice surprisingly soft. He had never been this vulnerable with anyone, let alone someone like Claire. But in that moment, it felt okay. "I guess I just needed a break from all the expectations. From pretending to be someone I'm not." Claire turned to face him fully, her expression understanding. She took a step closer, the distance between them closing. "You don't have to pretend with me, Ethan. I've seen who you really are. You've been hiding behind this persona for so long. You've probably forgotten what it feels like to be yourself." Her words hit him harder than he expected. He had spent so many years building his empire, his reputation, that he had forgotten what it meant to just be Ethan. To feel real. To feel connected to someone without the walls he had put up. For a moment, Ethan didn't know what to say. He had never been one to share his vulnerabilities with anyone. But something about Claire's presence, her calm assurance, made him feel safe enough to admit something he had kept buried for years. "I think I've lost myself," Ethan confessed, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've been so focused on building this life that I've forgotten how to live it. I don't even know who I am anymore, Claire." Claire's expression softened, and for the first time, Ethan saw a flicker of empathy in her eyes. It wasn't pity, but understanding. She took a step closer, placing a hand on his arm, a simple gesture, but it felt like a lifeline. "You don't have to have it all figured out," Claire said, her voice warm. "You're allowed to be human. You don't have to be the perfect CEO, the perfect businessman. You can just be Ethan." For the first time in a long time, Ethan felt a weight lift off his shoulders. Claire wasn't asking him to be anyone else. She wasn't demanding anything from him. She was simply offering him a space to be himself. And that was more than anyone else had ever offered. As the night continued, Ethan found himself more at ease in Claire's presence. The gala no longer felt like a performance. It felt like an opportunity to connect with someone who understood him in a way no one else did. And in that moment, as he stood there on the balcony with her, he realized that maybe, just maybe, there was more to life than business meetings and charity events. Maybe it was time to take off the mask. "Thank you," Ethan said quietly, his voice sincere. "For seeing me. For making me feel like I matter." Claire smiled, her eyes shining with warmth. "You do matter, Ethan. And you don't have to pretend anymore." As they stood together, looking out over the city, Ethan felt something shift within him. He wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was on the right path. Not the path he had built for himself, but the one that felt real. And that was enough for now. The days that followed the gala felt different for Ethan. The walls he had built around himself were slowly starting to crumble, and he could feel a shift inside him that he had long since buried. Every time he saw Claire, he noticed something about her. The way she carried herself, the way she spoke, and most of all, the way she made him feel. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like he had to put on a mask. With Claire, he could just be Ethan, and that was something he hadn't felt in a long time. It was a week later when Ethan invited Claire to lunch at a small, quiet cafe in the city. It was nothing like the grand restaurants he usually frequented. No media, no business deals, just two people talking over coffee. Ethan had never felt more nervous in his life. But he knew he needed to talk to her. He needed to thank her for being there for him when no one else seemed to notice his struggle. "I've been thinking about what you said," Ethan started, his fingers tracing the rim of his coffee cup. "About not pretending. About just being myself." Claire looked at him, a small smile on her lips. "And how does that feel?" she asked softly. "It feels." Ethan paused, trying to find the right words. "It feels freeing, in a way, but also scary. I've spent so long pretending that I've almost forgotten what it feels like to just be real. To not have to worry about what people expect from me." Claire's eyes softened as she listened. "I understand," she said quietly. "It's not easy, but it's worth it. You don't have to carry all that weight alone anymore." Ethan looked at her, his gaze steady. "I want to thank you, Claire, for being the person who finally helped me see that. For seeing me, not just as the CEO, but as the person I am beneath all of that. You've made me realize that I can be more than just my job, my title." Claire smiled, her expression warm. "You don't have to thank me, Ethan. I just told you what you needed to hear. It was up to you to listen." There was a pause between them, a moment of quiet understanding. Ethan realized then that it wasn't just about being real with his career or his company. It was about being real with himself. And maybe, just maybe, it was also about being real with Claire. As the conversation shifted to lighter topics, Ethan found himself laughing more freely than he had in ages. He had forgotten how easy it could be to just enjoy the moment. But it wasn't just the conversation that felt different. There was a warmth in the air between them, something that neither of them could ignore. Later that evening, as Ethan was walking back to his apartment, his phone buzzed with a message from Claire. "I'm glad we had lunch today. It was nice to see the real you." The words struck him in a way he wasn't expecting. Claire didn't just see the CEO. She saw the person behind the title, the person who had been buried under years of pressure and expectation. And for the first time in a long time, he felt seen. The next few weeks passed in a blur of meetings and events, but Ethan found himself looking forward to the moments when he could be with Claire, even if just for a few minutes. They started spending more time together outside of work, talking about everything and nothing at all. Ethan felt a sense of calm when she was around, as if the chaos of his world could pause for a while. One evening, as they sat on the balcony of Ethan's penthouse, the city lights flickering below them, Claire turned to him with a thoughtful look in her eyes. "You know, I've been thinking," Claire said, her voice soft. "You're not the only one who's been hiding. I don't think I've ever really let anyone see the real me either. But with you," she trailed off, as if unsure of how to finish. Ethan looked at her, his heart suddenly racing. "What are you saying, Claire?" She met his gaze, her eyes searching his. "I'm saying that maybe we're both finally ready to stop pretending. Maybe we've both been hiding behind things for too long." For a moment, neither of them said anything. Ethan could feel the weight of the words between them. It was as if they were both standing on the edge of something important, something that could change everything. Then, with a small smile, Ethan reached out and took her hand. "I think you're right," he said softly. "Maybe it's time we stopped pretending." Claire squeezed his hand in return, a silent agreement between them. They didn't need words to understand what this meant. It was the beginning of something new, something real. And for the first time in a long time, Ethan felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. As they sat there, hand in hand, looking out over the city, Ethan realized that the journey he had started wasn't just about finding himself. It was about finding someone who could see him for who he truly was. And, in turn, helping him see her, too. The following days were a whirlwind for Ethan. With Claire by his side, he felt a sense of clarity he had never known before. They spent their time talking, learning about each other's worlds, and for the first time in his life, Ethan realized how much he had been missing. The boundaries between work and personal life started to blur in a way that felt natural. He no longer felt the overwhelming need to separate his success from his emotions, and it was all because of Claire. One evening, after a particularly long day at work, Ethan sat in his office, going through the usual stacks of paperwork. But today was different. Today, he didn't feel the usual sense of dread or exhaustion that came with every late-night session. As he sat there, his thoughts drifted back to Claire. It had been almost 2 weeks since their conversation on the balcony, and things were slowly but surely changing. He found himself thinking about her more often than he had anticipated. She had become more than just his assistant. She had become someone he could trust, someone he could rely on. He was interrupted by a soft knock on the door. Without waiting for permission, Claire stepped inside, holding a cup of coffee in each hand. She smiled at him as she walked over to his desk and placed one of the cups in front of him. "I thought you might need this," she said, her tone light but caring. Ethan looked up at her, his heart unexpectedly skipping a beat. There was something about the way she looked at him, the way she cared, that made him realize just how much he had come to rely on her presence in his life. "Thanks," he said, his voice low, almost hesitant. "You've been a big help, Claire. More than you probably know." Claire sat down in the chair opposite him, her eyes meeting his with a quiet intensity. "I know you're used to doing everything on your own," she said softly. "But you don't have to anymore. You don't have to carry the weight alone." Her words struck Ethan deeper than he expected. For years, he had been the one to bear the responsibility, to carry the burden of his company, his success, and the expectations of everyone around him. But with Claire, it was different. She didn't expect anything from him except for him to be himself. "You've been a great friend, Claire," Ethan said, his voice filled with gratitude. "But I feel like there's something more. I can't keep pretending that I don't feel something deeper." He paused, the weight of his confession heavy on his chest. I think I'm falling for you." Claire's eyes widened slightly, but there was no fear or hesitation in her gaze. She simply smiled, a gentle, knowing smile that made Ethan's heart race. "I was hoping you'd say that," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them was comfortable, filled with an understanding that needed no words. Ethan felt a wave of relief wash over him, as if a heavy weight had been lifted from his shoulders. He had been carrying this burden for far too long, afraid of what might happen if he let someone in. But now, with Claire, he realized that the fear had been unnecessary. "So what happens now?" Ethan asked, his voice tinged with uncertainty but also a hint of excitement. Claire reached across the desk, taking his hand in hers. "Now we stop pretending. We take things one day at a time and see where it goes. No more masks. Just us." For the first time in what felt like forever, Ethan felt at peace. There was no need for grand gestures or complicated plans. With Claire, everything felt simple. He didn't have to be the perfect CEO or the flawless businessman. He could just be himself, and that was enough. As the days went by, their relationship deepened. They spent more time together, outside of work, away from the public eye. It was in the quiet moments, the simple conversations, where Ethan realized just how much he had been missing. The connection he felt with Claire was unlike anything he had ever experienced before. But as their bond grew stronger, so did the pressure from the outside world. Ethan knew that soon, people would start to notice the change in him. His colleagues, his friends, even his family would begin to ask questions. And while he was no longer afraid of what people thought, the idea of exposing his personal life in the public eye made him uneasy. One evening, as they walked through a quiet park near Ethan's apartment, Claire could sense his unease. "What's on your mind?" she asked, her voice filled with concern. Ethan hesitated, looking at the ground for a moment before meeting her gaze. "I'm just worried. Worried about what happens when everyone finds out about us. What if it doesn't work out? What if we lose everything?" Claire stopped walking, gently pulling his hand to make him face her. "Ethan, don't worry about what might happen. We'll figure it out together. But we can't live our lives constantly worrying about the future. We have to trust in what we have now." Her words were simple, but they had a profound effect on him. Ethan realized that. For the first time, he wasn't trying to control every aspect of his life. He wasn't hiding behind his title, his wealth, or his success. He was just living. As they stood there, in the quiet of the park, Ethan felt a shift within himself. He was no longer the man who had lived his life behind closed doors, pretending to be someone he wasn't. He was becoming the man he had always wanted to be, authentic, real, and ready to embrace whatever the future held with Claire by his side. Weeks passed, and Ethan found himself in a place he never thought he would be. His world, which once revolved around meetings, deadlines, and the relentless pursuit of success, was now focused on something else, something real. His relationship with Claire had become the most important thing in his life. It wasn't just about love. It was about understanding, trust, and finally feeling like he could be himself without the fear of judgment. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he had found peace. One morning, Ethan woke up to a text message from Claire. "Ethan, I've been thinking. What if we take this one step further? What if we make this official?" It wasn't a question he had expected, but deep down, he knew this was coming. He had already been thinking about it for a while. He smiled to himself as he typed a response. "I think I'm ready." The decision was made, and soon after, they were in the process of planning a small ceremony. It wouldn't be a grand affair, nothing like the corporate events Ethan was used to attending. This was something entirely different. This was about them. Just the two of them, making a commitment to each other that went beyond titles, beyond business deals, and beyond the expectations of the world around them. As the day of the ceremony approached, Ethan couldn't help but feel a sense of nervous excitement. It wasn't like him to be this vulnerable, to open himself up in this way. But with Claire, everything felt natural. She had a way of calming his fears, of making him believe that they could face anything together. She had become his anchor, the person who made him realize that he didn't need to be perfect to be loved. The small ceremony was held in a quiet garden, far away from the prying eyes of the media and business associates. It was an intimate gathering. Only a handful of their closest friends and family attended. As Ethan stood at the altar, waiting for Claire to walk down the aisle, he couldn't help but feel a sense of wonder. This was real. This wasn't some publicity stunt or a business arrangement. This was a choice, a decision to build something meaningful. When Claire walked down the aisle, Ethan's heart skipped a beat. She looked breathtakingly beautiful, not because of the dress she wore, but because of the way she carried herself. Confident, yet soft, strong, yet vulnerable. She was everything he had been looking for and more. The ceremony was simple but powerful. They exchanged vows, promising to be there for each other through thick and thin, to support each other's dreams, and to love each other for who they truly were. There were no grand speeches, no elaborate promises, just two people, making a commitment to each other in the most honest way possible. After the ceremony, as they walked hand in hand through the garden, Ethan realized how much had changed in such a short amount of time. He wasn't the man he had been before meeting Claire. He had shed the layers of self-doubt and fear, and for the first time in his life, he felt whole. It wasn't the success, the money, or the title that had given him this sense of fulfillment. It was love, true love, the kind that didn't require him to be anything other than himself. As they stood together, looking out over the garden, Claire turned to Ethan with a smile. "I'm so glad we took this step together," she said softly. "I knew there was something special between us from the start, but now, it feels even more real." Ethan looked at her, his heart swelling with emotion. "I've never felt this way before, Claire. You've made me believe in love again, in a way I didn't think was possible. I'm so grateful for you." Claire reached up to touch his face, her fingers brushing lightly against his skin. "And I'm grateful for you, Ethan. You've shown me that there's more to life than work, more to life than success. You've shown me what it means to truly live." In that moment, Ethan knew that he had found something more important than anything else in his life. He had found love, and with it, the realization that he didn't need to hide anymore. He could finally be himself, and that was more than enough. As the evening sun set over the garden, Ethan and Claire stood together, hand in hand, ready to face whatever came next. They didn't have all the answers, but they knew one thing for sure. They had each other, and that was all they needed. The days after their intimate ceremony felt like a dream for Ethan and Claire. They settled into their new life together, one that was simple but filled with joy. For the first time in years, Ethan was able to take a step back from the constant demands of his company and focus on what truly mattered. He found himself appreciating the little things: morning coffee with Claire, quiet evenings spent reading or talking about everything and nothing, and the growing sense of peace that came with simply being present. But as much as Ethan had changed, the world around him hadn't. The pressures of being a CEO were never far behind. His company demanded his attention, the board of directors constantly checking in, and the media never letting up on their scrutiny. Ethan knew that he couldn't escape the reality of his position. But for the first time, he didn't feel alone in it. He had Claire by his side, and together, they faced the challenges that came their way. One evening, as Ethan prepared for another busy week ahead, he found himself sitting in his office, looking out over the city. The familiar hum of the office building and the constant flow of emails and phone calls were always there, but this time, it didn't feel overwhelming. Instead, it felt manageable, even peaceful. He had learned to find balance, to prioritize what was important, and that included making time for Claire. No matter how hectic life got, he promised himself that he would never let work take over his personal life again. That night, Claire joined him in the office after finishing up her own work. She brought with her 2 glasses of wine, setting them down on his desk. "I thought you could use a break," she said, smiling as she took a seat across from him. Ethan looked up, surprised by her thoughtfulness. "You're right. I definitely need one," he said, taking the glass she offered him. The simple act of sharing a moment like this felt like a breath of fresh air. He realized that Claire had become his anchor, his reminder to slow down and appreciate the life they were building together. As they sat together, talking about their plans for the weekend, a thought struck Ethan. He had spent so much of his life focused on building his empire, on achieving success and maintaining his status, that he had almost forgotten how to enjoy life itself. But with Claire, he was learning to savor every moment. She had shown him that there was more to life than just work and achievement. There was love, there was connection, and there was the possibility of something even greater than success. After a few quiet moments, Ethan set down his wine glass and looked at Claire. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said the other day," he began, his voice sincere, "about how we don't need to pretend anymore. And I realized that I've been holding on to so much fear, so much control. But with you, I feel like I can finally let go. I can finally be myself, without all the walls I've put up." Claire listened intently, her eyes softening as he spoke. She reached across the desk, placing her hand over his. "You don't have to carry all that weight alone, Ethan," she said quietly. "You never have to hide from me. I love you for who you are, not for what you do or what you've accomplished. Just you." The words hung in the air between them, filling the space with an undeniable truth. Ethan's heart swelled with emotion as he realized how far they had come. He had spent so many years hiding behind his title, his success, and his fears. But with Claire, he was learning to embrace who he really was, and that felt more powerful than any business deal he had ever made. In the weeks that followed, Ethan continued to feel a sense of freedom he had never known before. He took on less work, delegated more, and made sure to spend more time with Claire. They took weekend trips, explored new hobbies together, and shared quiet moments that spoke more than words ever could. The world outside still demanded his attention, but he was no longer overwhelmed by it. With Claire by his side, he knew he could handle anything. But life had a way of testing their newfound peace. One afternoon, Ethan received a call from his lawyer with some troubling news. There were complications with a business merger that could affect the company's future. The stress that he thought he had left behind came rushing back, and he felt a familiar weight on his shoulders. For a moment, he questioned whether he could handle this, whether he was strong enough to face the challenges ahead. As the phone call ended, Claire walked into the room, sensing his distress. Without a word, she crossed the room and stood beside him. "What's going on?" she asked gently. Ethan looked up at her, his expression a mixture of frustration and worry. "There's a problem with the merger. It could have serious consequences for the company," he explained, his voice tense. Claire didn't hesitate. She took his hand in hers and sat beside him. "You've been through much worse, Ethan, and you're not alone in this. Whatever happens, we'll face it together." Her words were exactly what he needed to hear. With Claire by his side, Ethan felt a renewed sense of strength. He wasn't alone anymore. He had someone who believed in him, someone who saw him for who he truly was, beyond the pressures of success. Together, they could handle anything. And for the first time, Ethan realized that his true success wasn't in his company or his title. It was in the love and support he shared with Claire, the person who had helped him become the man he had always wanted to be. In the weeks that followed, Ethan and Claire's life together began to feel like the calm after a storm. The initial pressures from work had not disappeared, but they had learned to face them together. Ethan took a more balanced approach to his responsibilities, delegating tasks and allowing himself to take time off when he needed it. For the first time, his work was no longer the center of his life. Claire had shown him what it meant to be present, to not just exist for the next big deal or the next success. Their days were filled with moments that mattered, from simple conversations over breakfast to quiet walks. In the evening, One afternoon, as they sat together in their living room, a sudden knock at the door interrupted the peaceful silence. Ethan glanced at Claire, his brow furrowed slightly. "Expecting anyone?" he asked, a hint of curiosity in his voice. Claire shook her head, equally unsure. Ethan stood up and walked toward the door, his mind briefly racing with possibilities. When he opened it, he was surprised to find his brother, Michael, standing on the doorstep. Michael looked somewhat disheveled, his usual polished appearance replaced by an anxious energy. "Ethan," Michael said, stepping inside before Ethan had a chance to respond. "We need to talk." His voice was urgent, his expression serious. Ethan closed the door behind him and gestured for Michael to sit. Claire, sensing the tension, stood up from her seat, her eyes searching Ethan's for an explanation. "What's going on, Michael?" Ethan asked, trying to keep his voice steady. He could tell that something was off. Michael hesitated for a moment before speaking. "There's a situation with the company," Michael began, his tone serious. "I've been looking into some financial discrepancies in the latest reports. There's a chance that someone on the inside is leaking information, and it could put everything we've built in jeopardy. I didn't want to bring this to you, but we need to act fast." Ethan's heart sank. The weight of his responsibilities was never far from his mind. But this was different. This was a threat he hadn't seen coming. Claire glanced at Ethan, her concern evident, but she didn't say anything. Ethan could feel the familiar pressure building in his chest. He had worked so hard to protect the company, to build it into what it was today. The idea that someone within their own ranks could be betraying them was a crushing blow. "What do we do?" Ethan asked, his voice low. He could hear the fear in his own voice, something he had worked so hard to suppress. Michael took a deep breath. "I've already started the investigation, but we need your approval to move forward. If we're going to catch whoever is responsible, we'll need to go public with this. The board will have to be involved, and the media will undoubtedly get wind of it. This is going to get messy, Ethan. Are you ready for that?" For a moment, Ethan was silent, the weight of the decision heavy on his shoulders. He thought about everything he had worked for, everything he had built. But more than that, he thought about the life he was trying to build with Claire. Would this scandal pull him back into the life he had been running from? The life where work was everything, and everything else came second? Claire, sensing the shift in Ethan's mood, stepped closer to him. She placed a hand on his arm, her touch grounding him. "You don't have to do this alone," she said softly. "Whatever happens, we'll face it together." Her words were simple, but they were the reassurance he needed. He looked at her, and for the first time, he didn't feel the weight of the world crushing him. He wasn't alone. Not anymore. With Claire by his side, he knew they could face anything, even the storms that came from within. After a few moments, Ethan looked back at Michael. "Do what you need to do," he said, his voice steady once again. "We'll deal with the fallout. But we move forward together, no matter what." Michael nodded, his expression softening slightly as he realized that Ethan wasn't just the CEO anymore. He was a man who had found something far more important than success. He had found love, and with that, he had found strength. As Michael left to begin the investigation, Ethan turned to Claire. He didn't know what the future would hold, but he knew that whatever came their way, they would face it together. He wasn't the same man he had been when they first met, and now, he was ready for whatever came next, with Claire by his side. The days following the discovery of the financial discrepancies were filled with tension. Ethan and Claire had spent countless hours discussing the situation, trying to come up with a plan of action. The company was facing the possibility of a scandal, one that could jeopardize everything Ethan had worked so hard to build. But through it all, Claire was by his side, offering support and calm reassurance when he needed it most. They knew that no matter how difficult things got, they would face it together. One morning, Ethan sat in his office, staring at the reports on his desk. His mind was consumed with the situation. He had spent years building the company from the ground up, and now it was all at risk. The financial discrepancies had already made their way to the board, and Ethan knew it was only a matter of time before the media caught wind of it. He ran his hand through his hair, trying to steady himself. He couldn't help but wonder, how did things get this far? The phone rang, snapping Ethan out of his thoughts. It was Michael. "Ethan, we've got a lead," Michael said, his voice steady but urgent. "The person who's been leaking information, we have a name. But it's not someone we expected." Ethan's heart raced as he listened. His mind immediately went to the employees he trusted the most. Could one of them really be behind this? Who is it? Ethan asked, trying to keep his voice calm, though the anxiety was creeping up. Michael hesitated for a moment before responding. It's David Sanders, the CFO. He's been siphoning off funds and passing information to a competitor. We've got all the evidence we need. Ethan's mind went blank. David had been with the company for years. He had always trusted him, respected him. The idea that David could betray him in this way felt like a punch to the gut. He couldn't believe it. He thought of all the late nights they had worked together, all the times David had been by his side through the toughest decisions. Claire walked into the room, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. She could tell from the look on Ethan's face that the news was not good. She moved silently over to his desk, her presence comforting, even in the midst of chaos. Ethan took a deep breath, trying to collect himself. It's David, he said quietly, his voice tinged with disbelief. He's been behind it all. Claire sat down beside him, placing a hand on his arm. Ethan, you don't have to carry this alone, Claire said softly, her voice steady. I know this hurts, but you need to focus on what comes next. We have a plan. We can fix this. Her words cut through the fog of his thoughts. He had been so focused on the betrayal, so consumed by the shock, that he hadn't stopped to think about what they could do to make things right. Claire was right. They could fix this, but it would take everything he had. After a long pause, Ethan nodded. You're right, he said, his voice stronger now. We move forward. We handle this professionally, but we don't let it define us. We'll get through this, Claire. Together. The next few weeks were a blur of meetings, investigations, and difficult decisions. Ethan knew the media would be relentless, but he was determined to protect the company and the people who still believed in it. He made the necessary changes, confronted David, and ensured that every bit of corruption was rooted out. The process was painful, but it was necessary. And through it all, Claire was his rock. One evening, as the dust began to settle and the worst of the crisis was behind them, Ethan stood at the balcony of their apartment, staring out at the city. It had been a long, hard road, but he felt a sense of peace that he hadn't felt in a long time. Claire joined him, standing beside him as they looked out at the lights below. You did it, Claire said, her voice filled with pride. You faced the hardest challenge of your career, and you came out stronger. Ethan turned to look at her, his expression soft. I couldn't have done it without you. You've been with me every step of the way. Claire smiled, her eyes meeting his. We've always been in this together, Ethan. I wouldn't have it any other way. As they stood there, hand in hand, Ethan realized that this journey, the one that had started with a simple act of kindness and a leap of faith, had brought him more than just success. It had brought him love, trust, and the kind of partnership that made everything else seem secondary. No matter what challenges the future held, Ethan knew one thing for sure. With Claire by his side, he was ready for anything. As the months passed, Ethan and Claire found their rhythm in both their personal and professional lives. The company had weathered the storm of the scandal, and with the changes they had implemented, things were finally beginning to feel stable again. Ethan had learned the value of slowing down, of not letting the weight of his title or the demands of the business consume him entirely. Claire had shown him that success didn't have to come at the expense of happiness, and together, they had built something. Stronger than just a company, they had built a life. One quiet evening, as they sat together on the balcony of their apartment, the city lights twinkling below them, Ethan couldn't help but feel a sense of contentment wash over him. The past year had been filled with challenges, but it had also been a journey of transformation. He had lost sight of who he was for so long, buried under the pressure of his career and the expectations of others. But now, with Claire by his side, he had rediscovered the man he was meant to be. Claire, sensing his thoughts, turned to him with a smile. You're quiet tonight, she said softly. What's on your mind? Ethan looked at her, his heart full of gratitude. I've been thinking about everything that's happened. How much I've changed. How much we've changed. He paused, searching for the right words. I've always believed that success was everything. That if I could build something big enough, something impressive enough, it would fill the emptiness inside me. But I was wrong. It wasn't the company, or the title, or the money that made me whole. It was finding someone who saw me for who I truly am. You, Claire. You've made me realize that what really matters is love, connection, and being true to myself. With you, I feel complete. He took her hand in his voice filled with sincerity. Claire's smile widened, and she leaned in, resting her head on his shoulder. I've always known there was more to you than the CEO everyone sees. You're not just the businessman, Ethan. You're kind, generous, and capable of so much more than you ever realized. She paused, looking up at him. We both had to let go of our fears. I'm so proud of you, of what we've built together. She placed her hand on his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart. We're stronger than we've ever been. She smiled again, her eyes sparkling with warmth. As they sat there in the peaceful quiet of the night, Ethan felt a sense of clarity he hadn't experienced before. The journey to this point hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it. He had found not just success, but something deeper, someone to share his life with, someone who understood him, and someone who loved him not for his achievements, but for the person he was. It was a kind of love that didn't need to be earned or proven, and in that moment, Ethan realized that was the greatest success he could ever have. In the months that followed, Ethan and Claire continued to grow together, both as individuals and as partners. The company flourished under Ethan's leadership, but now, it was no longer the driving force in his life. He learned to balance work and personal life, to appreciate the small moments with Claire, and to never take their love for granted. Together, they traveled, built memories, and faced whatever challenges came their way, always side by side. One day, as they walked through the city, Claire stopped and turned to Ethan with a mischievous grin. You know, she said, her voice teasing, I think we've both done a great job of pretending to be someone we're not. Ethan raised an eyebrow, confused. She laughed softly and took his hand. But I think we're finally being the people we were always meant to be. She squeezed his hand, a look of love in her eyes. And that's something no one can take away. Ethan smiled, his heart swelling with affection for the woman standing before him. With Claire, Ethan had found not just love, but freedom, the freedom to be himself, to live authentically, and to embrace the future with someone who truly understood him. No longer burdened by the need to perform, to live up to the expectations of others, he could now walk forward, knowing that the journey ahead was not just about achieving success, but about creating a life filled with real moments, real love, and a connection that nothing could ever break. As they continued walking hand in hand, Ethan knew that the life he had always dreamed of was now within reach. And it wasn't just about the company or the accolades. It was about the person he had become and the love they had built together. And that, he realized, was the greatest achievement of all.